Um, so, for those of you not familiar with Betty, although I should imagine that you all are, um, I'm just going to read a little bit about her background, which is taken from Betty's website. Betty received her PhD from the University of California, Irvine, in comparative literature and the theory of symbolic and mythic language. She taught literature, writing, and symbolic and mythic language for 25 years. She served many years as the chair and program chair on the board of directors of the Jung Society of Claremont in California and sits on the academic advisory board of the Forever Family Foundation. It's such an absolute privilege to have you here with us today, Betty. And I wonder if I might begin by sharing a little bit about how you are with us today. This the background story, if you like, the behind the scenes. Um, I first became aware of your work a good few years ago now, when I was watching your interviews with Anne Baring about her book, The Dream of the Cosmos. And following those interviews, I looked you up and I found your books, The Miracle of Death, There Is Only Life, which no doubt we'll be touching upon today. And then also your new book, well, newish, isn't it? It's just a few years old.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Which I was so totally captivated by Merchant of Light that it's as soon as I'd finished reading it, I boldly contacted you through your assistant, um, Kimberly, and I asked you if you would consider addressing our small little group of questing souls. And to my absolute, total, and utter astonishment, you said yes. And here you are. And to me, that is just so magical. Because personally, I've never spread my net that wide before, and I'm just so it feels completely magical that you're here with us today. Um, but Betty, you begin your award-winning book, Merchants of Light, with the depiction of a sacred tree, the tree of life, presided over by both a god and a goddess. And the fruits of this tree are freely dispensed, you tell us, to our ancient ancestors. And when those who had eaten the fruits came back from their experience, and quoting you now, they knew that they were immortal, divine, and creative. And your book then goes on to explain what became of this ancient gift of cosmic consciousness, heart centered consciousness, how it was lost, how it was repressed, how it was actively censored, but also, you tell us, which is fascinating, how periodically through time, in a series of utterly bright renaissances over the last 1,000 years or so, it resurfaced. And now, you say, is one of those times. So when I first contacted you, Betty, I told you in my email that the story you trace for me is like a golden thread that I feel that I've been pursuing my whole life, but in a much more systematic yet totally inspired way. You have linked all these elements of a vast story together. So in a sense, you've made it possible for us to see it almost as a glance, which I find an incredible achievement. But it would, of course, be terribly wrong to suggest that it's simply the work of an accomplished academic. Obviously, this you are, but it's also, it's seen and from watching many of your interviews too, that the books are born out of your own lifetime search and incredible series of direct visionary experiences and dreams. So I wonder, question one now, Betty, I wonder if you might begin by telling us something of the story that led you to begin these incredible works.
You know, it's interesting that so many people who have gotten in touch with me have said that, you know, they were on the same search I was on. I think this is the search of our time, isn't it? That we want to connect the dots, or so many have said, well, that story in Genesis about the tree that we were forbidden to eat of the fruit. Why would we be forbidden to know the difference between good and evil, or to eat of the fruit of consciousness? Why would that be so? And so I think that in our time, we've all been on certainly very different journeys, but also kind of grounded in a journey to figure out what is the truth of our past. And that was my search to just think these stories, such as the tree in Genesis that we are forbidden to eat from, just didn't make sense. It didn't connect. And I also had trouble with the image of Yahweh, that Yahweh was a tyrant, was jealous, and vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. And that seemed to have been honored by people. And I thought, why would a God have vengeance? So I think I've discovered that the questions I was asking are the questions that many of us have been asking and trying to figure out. So as a young person, I just didn't know what to think. I didn't want to accept the science story that there's nothing but matter. We're a fluke of nature, and there's no meaning and no purpose. And when we're dead, we're dead. That was horrifying to me. And I think it's horrifying that this is a story that we have given our children for over 2,000 years. I mean, whether they believe it, whether they were in the Christian tradition or not, that story was in our culture. And it's that we are really nothing. We really are not important. And we see that today we are faced with that story by the people who want to transhumanize us, because after all, we're not worthy of continuing as human beings. I heard someone the other day say that the people in Silicon Valley, there really are people there who feel that the human species is over. It's had its time. We see it's not adequate, and we can do better. And that's what we're going to. This is the old Deuteronomist rising again, isn't it? As a matter of fact, it never really left us. We have been a culture in the West that we have not known how to value who we are, the greatness of who we are, that our ancestors wanted us to know. We are immortal. First of all, we are immortal, and we are divine, and therefore we are creative. And I talk about in the book how through a whole evolutionary process, we were all figuring out how to arrive at a place that we were capable of co-creating with the divine, the full divine that we can be too. So I think it was just this loneliness, this emptiness with the scientific explanation of things. And then there was the religious one. My parents were not religious, but they honored life, and they were pretty sure there was something going on, but they didn't know what. But my brother and I were just free to discover it for ourselves. So we would find churches wherever we moved to. We moved several times. We would find a church where there was a good children's program. And that was very important to me, because I did hear these beautiful stories about a man who was loving and kind and just a beautiful person. But as I grew older, I couldn't accept all of the stories that, I mean, heaven didn't sound that interesting. And it just, still, we needed to be saved. And today we need to be fixed or transformed altogether. So it was that old problem, is that we're not adequate. So that I just was on a search of, I couldn't accept either story. So that was a lifelong search of trying to find these threads that would would take the pattern of reality somehow in my mind. Somehow could I find that? And so that was a lifelong search.
I mean, how interesting. I mean, you talk about your university days, and how that was a mixed blessing, if you like.
Yes, yes. I went, the college I went to for undergraduate was a Christian college. And, but they were really wonderful people and very good scholars. But they were also compassionate and concerned and really connected with the students. And the first year, I mean, everybody went to church. And I did too. And then after the first year, I didn't go to church anymore. But I stayed home. It was so wonderful to be in the dorm alone and listen to music or whatever. But in those days, the Christians didn't. They were quite okay with that. In fact, the church or the professors made it very clear, this is your time to figure things out, to ask questions. And so I was really free to do that. And they were wonderful in helping me do that. Uh, so that was one thing. And then later, they said, why don't you come back and get your master's here in American Studies? I had gotten my bachelor's in English. So it was a wonderful place to be, beautiful country, and they were kind. And there was another a man who was coming who was quite a scholar in American Studies. So I said, okay, I don't know. It was because that was available. I did that. So that was a very, it was a heart-centered experience, but I still could not accept all of the belief system of Christianity. And so then I left there and I worked and went to Europe to work. And when I went back for my doctorate at the University of California, it was a very different experience. Not, I mean, it was kind of a ruthless, experience, but in a way that had its good sides. But there were professors who were very helpful and very good, and I learned a great deal from them. But I still couldn't have my questions answered there. In fact, I had to be pretty quiet about my questions. So it was really afterwards. And I taught mythology. That was wonderful because the students and I sort of discovered a lot of things together in looking at the mythologies and seeing that always there is something more. There's always that question. And I taught fairy tale, and the fairy tales were very concentrated in their symbolic structure. So together we learned a lot, but I still had not had the visionary experiences that I had heard other people had, and I wish I had had. But I was introduced to Carl Jung by a young man who had just finished Andover Newton Seminary and was a minister. And I think Andover now is connected to Yale, but he had his first church. And so I was dating him. He had a party with the young ministers and their girlfriends or wives. And that evening, they all sat around and talked about Carl Jung, whom I had never heard, mathematics, physics, and visionary experiences. And I just kept quiet because I didn't have a thing to say. I was so amazed at what they talked about. So when they left, I asked my friend questions. And so he took me into his library, and I took two books home. One was what is it? It was about individuation, the individuated self. I don't remember the title so much, but this other book was Modern Man in Search of a Soul. Modern Man in Search of a Soul. And I thought, well, that's what I'm in search of. I've been in search of soul all my life. So I started reading Jung. I think I was in my senior year of college, and I kept on reading him. And so I followed my dreams and I recorded them, and I really tried to understand them symbolically, learning from Jung. And later in life, then Jung began to appear in my dreams. And in one dream, I just tell this beginning of the story, is that I was in a forest, dark, couldn't find my way. Really, it was so dark. And I saw a light ahead of me, and it looks like it was in a cabin. So I went to that light and I knocked on the door, and Carl Jung answered. And he was silver hair, and he had on like a rubedo, a ruby red rose from alchemy, and I could see his library. It was all lined with books, leather covered books, ancient texts. And I thought, oh, I'll learn the secrets of the world here. This is where I'll learn it. And so he invited me in. Well, I was so unprepared, of course, for such teachings. The dream revealed that I tripped as I went in and flew into the room and landed on my belly. But I thought, well, I showed up, though. I showed up and I was there to learn. So I felt he was my mentor for years. I really did. I'm grateful to him for that. He helped me. He had the same questions. And so I had studied Freud, but Freud didn't have those questions. And Jung did. And so he really became a major mentor in those years.
Well, Betty, it's interesting. I mean, what a fantastic dream! What an incredible dream. You start your chapters, which you had retrieving the soul, with a quote from Carl Jung, which I just happen to have here. You quote him saying, "To live fully, we have to reach down and bring back the deepest levels of the psyche from which our present consciousness has evolved." Obviously, that's you then went on to talk about the cave cultures of Western Europe, the sand cultures of Africa, the megalithic monuments constructed as you say, as alembic style vessels for our transformation. You write beautifully and in depth about ancient Egypt, about the Greek pre-Socratics, and right through to the first temple Jewish tradition and the mystery schools of the later Essenes. So that's quite a breadth of. But starting off with that quotation that you have to head all that up.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, that even as you read it, that really is deeply impressive to think that we carry the history of our ancestors within us. That Jung was absolutely definite about that. And just the other day, I was reading a quotation by Peter Kingsley, is that he's said the same thing, that we have deep within us everything that we need. It's just waiting to be touched. And I also think of Jesus, of the Nag Hammadi text quotation, when he said, if you bring forth what is within you, what is within you will save you. But if you do not bring forth what is within you, what is within you will destroy you. So it's that becoming aware and conscious of all of the things our ancestors have experienced from early on all the way through, that's a kind of amazing thing to me, that is within us. And sometimes they appear in dreams or visions or whatever, but we have everything in us that we need to teach us all we need to know. And we just have to learn how to tap it, to touch it.
And of course, the ancients did have the techniques for doing just that, didn't they, as you explained?
Yeah, that's right. Yes, that's a huge point, is that we are told that Jesus taught a hidden tradition, and that hidden tradition was a technique, I'm sure. There are stories about teaching the round dance to people as a technique. And we know, of course, that the ancient tradition made it very clear that we have it within us, but we need the technique. So we know now that when our ancestors did various types of rituals, that those movements created a wave within consciousness that connected the various brain components. I mean, how they knew that, we don't know, but they discovered it, I'm sure, with various rituals. And then we discovered it much later scientifically, that they actually, these rituals, that was a technique of movement certain types of movements that would actually create this brain wave that would integrate. So yes, but when the Roman Church came, of course, they did away with all techniques. If they even knew what they were doing with them, I don't know. But of course, we know that the heretic was the one who knew how to, or spontaneously fell into experiencing these higher states of consciousness, which they taught in the mystery schools. So I think today we're discovering some of those techniques of our ancestors, but I think we're also developing new ones because, it's like we have this vast, um, this system within us, like a jet. We don't really know quite how to get it going. But I think that in this fifth Renaissance, we are learning how to ignite that frequency within us and get the brain components integrated so that we move into higher states of consciousness rather easily. It's been difficult, So
Actually, I wonder if you can take us back a little bit and tell us about the first temple traditions and how that gift was really initially lost.
yes, well, and here again, we're so fortunate to have the Old Testament scholar Margaret Barker. And it was Anne Baring who told me about Margaret Barker. And I started reading her work. I was just astounded. And she points out, now that we have all of the literature available, that those pieces of literature that were not put into the canon of either the Jewish tradition or the Christian tradition, is that we have all of these texts that were known in the past, or at least a lot of them. And she said, once you put all of those together, a very different picture emerges. So she saw that the first temple tradition was a shaman mystic tradition. And of course, the temple itself, always from around the world, but certainly we know, especially from Egypt, that the very architecture of the temple is a sacred structure to ignite. It was a technique in and of itself, the temple. If we entered the temple, we are an aggregate of the whole field. And there are certain structures in that temple that would ignite an illumination within us of what that particular temple had to teach us. So the first temple was that kind of temple, that there was, the one of the big area for people to enter to. That was time and space. That was symbolic of time and space, material reality. And then there was the Holy of Holies, which only the priest entered. And in the Holy of Holies, which was called Day One, that would be what we would call the intermediate or archetypal world. And here, the world that existed in outside of time and space, that is that world of pure spirit, pure intellect, no form, that existed, and it was in the Holy of Holies that it entered and took form, symbolically, archetypally, and it was in that space that the priest joined the priestess, you might say, symbolically, archetypally, that the opposites came together in the sacred marriage. And they experienced higher consciousness. When he came back through the curtains into time and space, he was in the other part of the temple. So, the Sufis also see reality in this way, that there is time, there is pure intellect, pure consciousness, pure spirit, no form whatsoever, but it's always moving into the archetypal world in which the laws shape it into these archetypes. And then that moves into the material world. And if we can live with those laws, create through those laws, then of course we can be very creative. And so the first temple in Judaism was actually a structure of that understanding of reality. And of course, how it was destroyed. Margaret Barker shows us that 621 BCE, under Josiah, although it was attempted before him, but under Josiah, these Deuteronomists, priests, and as Barker points out, we don't really know much about them, but they came in they said, well, there was a scripture within the temple and they were following that. But it was really a left brain, you might say, movement, is that they destroyed the whole concept of the temple and the Holy of Holies, which was the feminine was extremely uh, powerful. As Barker points out, Yahweh at that time was married to wisdom, the feminine. And of course, she had all of these beautiful groves of trees, symbolic of what we now know, that she was the tree and that it was rooted deep into the depths of the heart of the cosmos. And when that energy flowed through the tree, she was the tree. And she gave that. If you ate of that, you were enlightened. And in Egypt, of course, they had the beautiful tree too, with the trunk of the tree was actually a female, often a feminine, and she was actually giving a glass of liquid to someone, or the fruit. So the Deuteronomists would have none of that. They destroyed those groves of trees. There were so many images of the feminine, destroyed that. And the male, the masculine, Yahweh, is left without a consort, without a partner, without wisdom. And earlier in the Temple of Solomon, Yahweh and wisdom were joyfully married and created the universe together. They co-created it. They gave birth to it together. And there's so many beautiful things that were used to describe her. It's said that if you hold me fast, you will not sin. Well, that seems strange, but actually it's not, because she was symbolic of the right brain and the heart. And if we live from the heart, we're not likely to create the kinds of sins we're going to create if we just live from the left brain. And also, she said, if you hold me fast, you will have joy. And that's also true if we live from the heart. So there were just many, many beautiful understandings that came out of the experience of the first temple tradition, that we live through the heart, through wisdom. She was wisdom. And there was a statement, if you allow her to enter you, all things change. She can enter spontaneously and transform you. Well, that's true of the spirit of love. But poor Yahweh was left without her, looking as though he had abandoned her. And the Yahweh becomes very typical in the Old Testament of modern day tyrants. And he's jealous. He is a warring God. He has favorites and so on. It's just it's a kind of a left brain Yahweh after this. So that's what happened. But those Jews who didn't go along with that were the Essenes, scattered all over the Palestinian area, in Egypt, or the Therapeutae were very much like the Essenes. And so they carried on a tradition in which they said, we carry the true covenant of Israel, which was that heart visionary consciousness and of the existence of the spirit world, and of the coming together of the masculine and the feminine, which were symbolic of the great two dimensions of the brain, the left and the right, living through the heart that opens us to the cosmos. But that was destroyed by the Deuteronomist. And when the Roman church came in, and here Barker says, and it makes sense to me, that Jesus was a renaissance of the first temple tradition. So he was teaching that. And of course, he had the beloved Mary Magdalene, and he loved women. He was, he was not a prejudiced person as some of his disciples might have been, but the relationship we're finding now between Mary and Magdalene was a beautiful, loving, spiritual relationship. And so, of course, the church got rid of that. She's called a whore. And so Jesus was simply alone, but also Jesus they didn't nurture the Jesus who taught the hidden tradition. They nurtured him as a God that we had to be subordinate to outside of us. And the moment, of course, we take it outside, it doesn't work because Jesus said it's inside. And so he became a God that we should worship outside of us. And that became the foundation. And the ones who knew the hidden tradition and experienced the visionary spiritual world were the heretics outside the church that were condemned by the church. So we've lived all of these years with a distortion of the true vision of who we are.
Yes, and after that period, which was about, I think it was about 400, wasn't it? And there was such a long period that then followed, which I suppose we could call the Dark Ages. You know, before the first of the Renaissances that you describe, um, the first one being the great flowering of the 12th century. But before that, you know, there was that really long period of
Yes.
the tradition being lost.
Yes, it's yes, for approximately 700 years. There were, there always are little fires here and there and so on. But to look at it in kind of general terms, it wasn't until the high Middle Ages, and the dates are always movable. But I say around 1000 beginning or 12th century was incredible. But here is this high Middle Ages that people usually kind of dismiss as a church, but this was a revival. Again, this was a revival of this ancient tradition. And for example, in Chartres, there were, when the Chartres was built, this whole process of building cathedrals, they built so many cathedrals in Europe and certainly in France, many of them in Germany. But at Chartres, I like to focus on Chartres, it's such a sacred place that there were Sufis there who worked in the building of it, probably on the stained glass, who after the building was over, no one knew where they went. We don't have any information. And the builders of the cathedral, this was a sacred temple built in the ancient traditions. In Egypt, the temple was, as I had said, they were techniques. Schwaller de Lubitz said that Egypt is built on the principles of cosmic consciousness. Each of the temples is a chapter in that consciousness, and they are constructed. These ancient builders were initiates. They were constructed so that when we entered them, we could be illuminated. And we could also, I think they had time of initiation over periods of time being in those temples. Well, it looks like these ancient builders, initiates were back in the high Middle Ages. Where had they been, But of course they were underground, but they built these Gothic cathedrals in such a way that they can trigger experiences within the individual. And there was also the hidden tradition of Jesus seems to have been carried in the early years by Paul. Now, I think there's distortions later on in his teachings. I don't know, but at that time, Paul was like on fire. He went to Greece, to Athens, and there was a man called Dionysius who heard him speak. And he too, he had been initiated in several of the ancient traditions. He saw the Jesus tradition as a great initiation into who we really are. And so he then his teachings went through Europe to teach the hidden tradition that Jesus taught. Paul supposedly came back, and then in the Middle East, he taught that tradition. And it may well be that some of the teachings of Paul were changed later, but at any rate, the Dionysius Areopagite his teachings went through Europe. They call it pseudo Dionysus. It's not pseudo, it's just different people are carrying forth his teachings. And the teachings were not far from Chartres. So the master teachers at Chartres, around 1000, before the actual temple or cathedral was built that we know today, Chartres was a place of renaissance in and of itself. The master teachers taught Aristotle, Plato, they taught the logical left brain. kinds of things, but they also carried that hidden tradition that Jesus taught, and they were in touch with the Dionysus teachings of the Jesus of the hidden tradition. But at any rate, they were masters also of the visionary world. So that was a powerful time when people who went into that cathedral were actually initiated, but that was left brain, right brain, because they're very intellectual as well as visionary. And they knew the mystery of the heart. So, in fact, the heart was, again, it came into its own, you might say. There were mystics and the Beguine women, many of whom were mystics, and other monks and nuns. They caught this hidden tradition. So there were many mystics of the time. So it was like a rebirth of the hidden tradition that Jesus taught. And right in that cathedral and right in the center of it is a great labyrinth, which is the ancient symbol from old Europe of 6,000, 4,000 BCE, in which the labyrinth was dominant. But the first labyrinth that we know anything about is 24,000 years old, from Malta in Siberia. So this was one of those symbols that's deep within us. It came back, and there were cathedrals in many, I mean, labyrinths in many of the cathedrals. And to walk the labyrinth, if we walk it with that desire, that intention, then we activate the field. And it's an interesting thing that Keith Critchlow talks about. He has a wonderful video on Chartres Cathedral, that when you walk the labyrinth, you get right to the center of the labyrinth. And when you look up, it's the rose window with Mary holding the Christ child, which he says the entire cathedral is an initiation into the Mary, M-A-R-Y, mysteries, is that you have given birth to Christ consciousness. And he said, if you could take the cathedral and take that part of the rose window and lay it flat on the labyrinth, the circles would meet perfectly. So they're really saying, when you get to the center of the labyrinth, you have achieved Christ consciousness. And I love how the Hungarian scholar Clarke said that when we walk the labyrinth, we go around and around and round to the deepest part of who we are, to the divine mind. We experience the divine mind, not as other, but as self. And this was the hidden teaching of Jesus, which came back in the High Middle Ages.
That's incredible. That's the big mystic insight, isn't it? That
Yes.
yes, that in the middle you meet yourself.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. And the tree symbolism was the same. If you drink from the tree, if you eat that fruit, you know who you are, and you know you are Christ consciousness. That is who we are within, if we can bring that forth. And of course, you can't control people who know that. So the powers that be simply inverted all of those stories and got rid of the labyrinths. They had chairs sitting on the labyrinth in Chartres for a very long time, totally unaware. Later, that was much later, like today. Not today, but I don't know that they do that today. There's more awareness of the labyrinth. But in the 70s, a friend of mine was there and said, yeah, the chairs are still there on the labyrinth.
I mean, it was a wonderful period because it was the period of also chivalry and courtly love, wasn't it? And this new sort of re-embracing of the feminine, but also it was the period of the Grail legend.
Yes, yes, it was a time. It still fascinates me so much, those images. And I think that's because that's a myth of our time. We didn't complete it then, and it's still a myth that for us today to achieve that Christ consciousness and integrate the feminine, which is the right brain, heart, love, consciousness that connects to the cosmos. So yes, everything changed. I don't know chess, but even the game of chess changed. They made the feminine more powerful. I don't know in what way because I don't know the game, but in men were even dressing a little bit more in feminine clothes. I mean, it was just the feminine, it's as though something deep in the psyche was going to express itself, however it could. That feminine had to come back. The feminine in the men, the feminine in the women. And there's so many incredible stories of listening to the feminine. I'll tell just one story and then go to the Grail. One of my favorite stories is the story of a knight, Gawain, I believe it was, who married the most incredibly beautiful woman. I mean, everyone just was silent when they saw her. She was so incredibly beautiful. And so when they went to their room at night, suddenly she was the ugliest hag he had ever seen. She just was, it was horrifying. I mean, he could hardly bear to look at her. And she said to him, you know, Gawain, I can be beautiful for you at night and ugly at court, or I can be ugly here and beautiful at court. Which do you want? And of course, the beauty of the story is that he says, oh, my lady, the decision is yours. So it was finally letting the feminine tell him what she needed. And so, of course, she was beautiful both in court and with him at night. But it's such a beautiful story, isn't it? Of
Oh, beautiful.
recognizing, yeah,
And
recognizing
you,
the
you
feminine.
you tell us, don't you, Betty, that the Grail legends are partly all about getting to know the feminine, getting
And yes,
reacquainted, as it were.
yeah, in just such a way. Uh, and from Ireland, these Grail stories came because Ireland hadn't been captivated by the church, and some of the old stories were still there, not inverted. So that kind of moved through England and then into Brittany, into Europe, and of course, changing all the times. And here were the bards who were singing it to the courts, and there was a lot of influence. Certainly there was in our depths that need for this to come up, but we were also influenced by the Islamic culture. At that time was a highly, from 700 AD, it was a highly developed culture, and women had more, the universities, men and women were working together, but so they had really pretty much encircled Europe and the South, and all the way up into Spain to Cordova. And Cordova was the real high place of intellectualism and spiritual beingness, and people from Europe would go there. So Cordova very much was influencing Europe, that's for sure. But it wouldn't have. We were not attracted to stories that don't ignite us, you know. So it was there, and it helped to ignite that in us. So as the stories spread, of course, it was about the feminine. Dozens or hundreds probably of stories about the feminine and man's relationship to her, how to relate to her, not to control her, not to do the way he had been doing supposedly in culture, but no, it's that choice is yours, and he learns from that, and it's absolutely beautiful. And of course, she is the Grail because within us, because she is the heart consciousness and the love of that consciousness, and that just comes back in so many beautiful ways of integrating all of these brain components into through the heart. And the Grail stories, I think, of course, once the church found out, that was over, those things were over. But just like all of those periods, it went underground. These great spiritual traditions, Egypt, the tremendous spiritual tradition of Egypt, went underground and emerged in Hermeticism, alchemy, and in Egypt, and then there was the Jewish tradition, uh, kept underground and quiet, but working in Kabbalah, and then it emerged, and mystic Christianity, the teachings that Jesus had taught, those emerged. So they would go underground and then reemerge.
I mean, the stories were in a way a bit safe, kept safe, weren't they? Because they were in symbolic language, and so
Yeah,
therefore they didn't suffer the same fate as the Cathars, for
exactly.
example.
And
you know,
exactly, you're absolutely right. And fairy tales too, they were just dismissed as kid stories. That's something for children. These were symbolic stories about the development of the whole being. And so, yeah, they could survive because that's what they were thought. And these were just, as a matter of fact, my learning about the right left brain, right brain is through mythology, because they were always concerned about bringing the opposites within us together, symbolized by the male and female. I know Ian McGilbert's this wonderful book, The Master and His Emissary, says, well, the left brain is not masculine, the right brain is not feminine, and it isn't, except that for thousands of years it's been symbolized in that way. And so we can learn from mythology so much about the mind and the soul, and how to integrate them, and wholeness. So yeah, and that's how they survived. You're absolutely right.
I loved your conversation with Anne Baring about the Holy Grail, where you were talking about the consequences of the estrangement between masculine and feminine, that the king was sick, that the land had fallen to waste, that the gift of inspiration was no longer served by the maidens of the well, and that there had been terrible consequences. And the
Yes.
king, at the midst of it, was completely wounded and sick. And of course, the whole quest, doesn't it? It turns upon the ability to ask an essential question. And that question you and Anne Baring discussed, which is, what ails thee? What asked to the king, what ails thee? And I just loved that conversation that you had, because you broadened it out, and you made it obviously not just about that small story back in olden days, but you made it as a pertinent question for now also.
Yes, that's an incredible symbolism, isn't it? Is that the king is living in a land that is no longer fruitful. It's a wasteland. And he is the wound that the king has. There are two kind of stories going. Here's the conscious story of him as King Arthur, and then there is the story of the king who is so wounded that that he can't function, and he's wounded in the thigh, which really is, he is sterile. He cannot create, is the symbol of it. And in Arthur, his Guinevere leaves him. I mean, the feminine is gone. So it's an incredibly beautiful and highly structured story, or stories about that, is that we, as the masculine, are wounded. The feminine isn't around, and we can't reproduce, we can't create, and the culture can't create, so it just falls into a wasteland. And it's such a crucial story for us today, isn't it? Because we're in a wasteland, and there are those who are planning to make it even greater wasteland, to get rid of the human species because it's not worthy, not even quite fixable. They're thinking now, just get rid of it altogether and have just AI, a big left brain with no right brain or heart. And so it's so crucial to ask that question: what ails me? What ails my culture? And how can it be healed? What can we do with this? Because I think that we're seeing this darkness today, maybe clearer than we did in the past, uh, maybe because there's more light. Because I think this is a fifth renaissance, and there's so many people who are questioning and seeking and having visions and experiences. And I think there's a lot more light. But we are seeing this terrible wasteland today. So I think that the Grail legend is our legend today. It is our sacred text, we might say, today, to how do we heal this? How do we heal it? What ails thee? First of all, we have to know. And then the journey. And of course, when in the story, the King Arthur's knights are at the round table, and this beautiful grail appears magically. And then they all strike out into the forest in a different way. They all strike out in their own way. And once they're in the forest, which is the labyrinth, then each step of the way, the experience that is right for them occurs to them. And they are learning to bring up all that is within them, to teach them all they need to know. And that's how they go about the healing, is that they try to find that within themselves, which I think is the teaching of the legend, of the Grail legend, is again to go within. It's there. And the journey will, in the labyrinth, will, whatever we meet, will be for our learning. And if we don't quite learn it, then it'll repeat itself and again on many different levels. And it's, of course, there's joy and there's sorrow, there's tragedy, there's heartbreak, but there's love, but there is the continual becoming in that labyrinth. And that is such a beautiful, sacred text, the Grail legend, I think.
Definitely, definitely. So the next period you talk about, Betty, following that marvelous um, period, is another marvelous period, which is the Italian Renaissance. And I was particularly, it's a period that we have pondered here at Rock Bank too. And I was particularly struck by the you mentioned all the numerous paintings that were commissioned of the Annunciation, and you talked about that painting being symbolic in a much deeper sense than maybe just the coming together, the meeting of the two worlds between the Virgin Mary and the angel Gabriel, but also a meeting within ourselves, our coming together with our own inner divinity, if you like, at that time.
Yes, I think those paintings are very beautiful of the angel coming to Mary and Mary confronting the angel and to tell her she is going to give birth to Christ or to a savior, or she is giving birth to her own Christ consciousness. I think it's not taking too far a step, because we know that the cathedrals, especially at Chartres, it was the Mary mysteries. It was when Mary holds the Christ child, and, and it matches our journey at the center of the labyrinth. That is us becoming Christ conscious. And so the paintings began in the High Middle Ages, and it's incredible how the angel comes in. And many of them, there is this like beam of light that comes from the angel into Mary, or comes from the cosmos into Mary. And so it's definitely connected to that deeper mystery of the High Middle Ages, of each of us becoming Christ conscious, giving birth to that consciousness within us. So it was continued in the Renaissance, Italian Renaissance, beautiful paintings of very similar way. And I do think that it's legitimate to see that as, whether even the painter was aware, but it's this deep necessity to get this out in painting, this connection between a cosmic reality and the human reality, and of giving birth to that higher consciousness. So yes, I think that played a role. The church was not comfortable with, they would be comfortable, like the fairy tales and the myths, they're comfortable with an angel coming to Mary, that she is going to give birth to a child outside of us. But I think the deeper one is that we are giving birth to that child within us.
And it was such a marvelous period, wasn't it, Betty, with all the re-embracing of all the hermetic texts and so on that has been lost, and Ficino, there was all the the translations, the new translations that were coming into Italy, sponsored
Yes.
by the Medici family in part. But it was a wonderful opening up and re-embracing of what had been set aside, with the fall of the classical world.
Yes, that's exactly a beautiful way of saying it, is that it's like in the High Middle Ages, so much that had been censored, omitted, came back. And now again in Italy, even other things that had been omitted were coming back. Of course, it was inspired by the Hermeticum, that underground tradition of Hermeticism that had come as a text, I think, from Macedonia into Italy, and they were just amazed with it. So this was a coming back of that, but it was also coming back of the human body, which, oh my, had to be covered up before. And there was just this incredible discovery of the human body, the male body, the female body, and nature, because the church had somehow not seen nature as sacred. It had been, kind of anything that was natural was kind of prohibited. And so the natural world came back. And here were painters who were painting these beautiful female bodies, naked bodies in nature, or the Michelangelo with David and so many of the other just beautiful expressions of nature. But also there was a whole discovery of other worlds and different economies and things like that. So the world around us was much more prominent in the Italian Renaissance, but still the deep strain of it, what actually ignited it, was that corpus hermeticum and this, what is it within us? Who are we? And a discovery of the beauty and the laws of nature. But one of the horrible things of Christianity is the loss of respect and the sacredness of nature and the laws of nature. Our ancestors wanted, first and foremost, they wanted to know the laws of nature. And then they knew that we as creators create within those laws, which give us tremendous, almost infinite possibilities. But if we don't create within those laws, we'll have a wasteland. So they were very aware of that, and that was lost. And today we have postmodernism, which is a to be expected outcome of the worldview that there's nothing, and a left brain awareness that they would say there are no intrinsic laws, there are no intrinsic values, which is a complete negation of who we are and what the cosmos is. Because the mystics who had the experience of pure consciousness, pure intellect, and then going into the archetypal world where the laws exist in archetypal form, and then we have to know those laws and create by those laws. They could never come up with such a crazy notion as postmodernism, which now so many people present as being so highly intellectual and in the know. I mean, it is such a degradation of nature and the creation and ourselves.
Goodness me. I suppose in a way the Grail reflects that as well, doesn't it? The fact that there
Yes.
isn't a wasteland. Yeah.
Yes, I think that every time these ancient cultures that knew that secret, when they were destroyed and went underground, every time they come up in the Renaissance, like in the High Middle Ages or the Italian Renaissance, or later in Prague, and then in Germany, and now all of this knowledge comes with it. And again, it comes with it these incredible creative laws of a universe, of heart consciousness. It isn't a limitation. The laws actually are, they allow infinite possibility, but we do create within those laws. Otherwise, it's chaos and a belief in nothing and no value. And that's really where we are today. But we also, I could say, where we are also is this rebirth of the light. And I think one of the strongest ways and most pervasive ways yet that this Renaissance has tremendous possibilities.
Before we move on to where we are today, Betty, can I take you back to the Rosicrucian period? I mean, it's that arose in the early 17th, because I think it's a period that possibly not many of us may know that much about, but I believe it's has been for you in the past an area of interest. But I wonder if you could tell us about its flourishing, its brief rise, and its brief flourishing, and also its fall, and maybe then link that to then the rise of the the scientific paradigm and the French Enlightenment.
Yes, yes. Well, the interesting thing and beautiful thing is, of course, that anyone who's in touch with that other dimension and has the experiences, of course, they want to understand it with a left brain too. So these mystics were also scientists. And after the Italian Renaissance just kind of lost its energy, but it lost its energy because of the church too. And let me just tell the story about the end of that period. And I always use Pico della Mirandola because it kind of breaks my heart. I think as a mother or father of young people, we could see that here is this young man in his 20s. Uh, he he knew probably 6 or 7 languages. And if he read a book, he could quote it all the way through. And he had this is like, sounds impossible, but they said he could do it backwards. So what kind of brain did he have? I mean, I can't imagine it, but let's just say he remembered it going forward. And so he was this really brilliant kind of mind. And he was young and didn't know all of the limits that the powers that be could put on him, but he really became interested in Kabbalah. And he thought, well, this is Christianity. What's going on here? And then he began to really study all these various traditions, and he realized it's at the core, they're all the same, of course, because they have to do with going inward and discovering our own creativity and divinity and that of the universe. And so you probably know this story, but it just always, he decided that he would have all of the great religious leaders in Europe to meet in Italy. They would come to meet and they would talk about their traditions, and people would see that they are the same at the core. They're the same. So he went to Rome to have it printed. He wrote 900 theses. Imagine he's in his 20s and he had 900 theses to be printed and have all of these people come to Rome. Well, of course, when the church found out, they said, no, you're not going to print that. And no, you're not going to have that conference in Italy. In fact, you're going to jail. So they sent him to jail. Now, some of the Medicis got him out later, but this is how the culture has destroyed creativity in the young and in the old, again and again and again. But it wasn't really for nothing, because the English Renaissance came just a little later, and they really, through various writers, they got Pico's work, and they really developed Rosicrucianism. So now to move to 1600 in the 17th century, when here was Italy that was kind of over now, and the Italian Renaissance. And so everything went underground, except it was really working its way to England, and England was working its way to Heidelberg in Germany, and then to Prague. So what happened in Prague is that all of these underground traditions emerged in Prague. And also Heidelberg was quite a Renaissance city in the 1600s. And Friedrich, who was the prince there, and Elizabeth, his wife, they were married, and I think they were married in England because, yes, she was British, and came to Heidelberg, and there was such a display. Everybody thought now there's going to be freedom because the Protestants will be in control. Protestants could be repressive, but not as bad as the Catholics. Well, that didn't happen, because later the king married another of his children to someone in Spain. So he didn't support the Protestant movement, which was a freedom movement for this underground tradition. But at any rate, here they are in Prague. These are mystics and they're scientists. And of course, Bacon and John Dee in England had a lot to do with influencing this too. They were part of the intelligent and spiritual movement. But in Prague, it was just a flowering with these underground traditions together. And Rudolph had been there. He was interested in all this. He allowed it. And so it was a real renaissance. And well, not just I, but nobody knew about it until the 20th century. We didn't even know that happened. I mean, that's how much things can be destroyed of our past. And Frances Yates, I think she was at the Warburg Institute, and she started finding pieces of, she said it was like an onion taking off layer after layer after layer. And that at the core, she said, here was a renaissance that we knew nothing about. It was so totally destroyed by the church. So from 1600 to 1620, these mystic scientists were working together, and they were working through Heidelberg and all the way to London. So there was this traffic from London to Prague, back and forth, some real renaissance taking place. And there are people today who have studied deeply these renaissance Rosicrucian principles. And again, it's a powerful spiritual tradition. But the Protestants thought, okay, they will get Friedrich to when the throne was, when the space of power was empty in Prague, they will put Friedrich there. Well, it was a dangerous move, of course, because the church is pretty powerful. They did. Friedrich and Elizabeth went to Prague, and they're called the Winter King and Queen because that's as long as they lasted. The church, when church was not going to have its power questioned, it moved in and wiped it out. And Friedrich and Elizabeth went to Holland, I think, but Heidelberg was destroyed. That beautiful, all that it was destroyed. Prague, all that they had done was destroyed. The texts were burned and just thrown into the streets. So no one even knew until the 20th century that there had been this Renaissance. But it exists today in Rosicrucianism. And Frances Yates was one of the first, but there have been quite a few writers since who really revealed more and more about that period. And so that went underground. In fact, there was a 20 years war when the Catholics went in and destroyed everything. 20 years they were fighting. I have read that in Germany, sometimes half the town was wiped out, killed. It was horrible. And then when that was over, there was in 1660. So this was 1620 destroyed, 20 more years. 1660, the Royal Society for the Advancement of Science was formed. And everybody knew there is no way that any mystic can ever say, you can't talk about consciousness, you cannot study anything except matter. This was clear that the church would not tolerate it. I mean, look at the destruction that had just happened. I mean, practically wiped out that kind of thing. There were some scientists who had been part of this mystic science movement, but they knew to keep quiet. They had to be kind of underground about it. And so that's why we had this whole theory of materialism, because the church did not allow the study of anything by those scientists but matter. So of course they weren't going to discover anything else because they didn't have the tools for it. So this was the beginning of materialism, and thanks to the church once again. And then later, beginning in the 17th century as well, were the French philosophers, the French Enlightenment. Well, as Yates points out, the true Enlightenment was not there, it was in Prague, because that Enlightenment had to do with true spiritual, cosmic enlightenment, real enlightenment. But and that failed, that was wiped out. So when the Enlightenment came, it wasn't an enlightenment except of the left brain, because they made it very clear everything that came before brought us where we are. We don't need it anymore. You know, this left brain, of course, heart they didn't even know about. I mean, all of that other nonsense, myth and well, we don't need that. It's left brain. And so here we have the left brain science, the left brain philosophy and view of the world. Well, a little bit later, in about 18th century, 1720 or 75, in the late part of the 1800s, and unto 1850, there is the English and German Romantic movement. It's kind of not the right word for it, because it was another Renaissance. And Germany, and England too, but Germany, especially under Goethe and so many of the writers in Germany, they were the great resistors. They were just the rebelliousness against that science, material science and material philosophy. And they then created, remember in the Renaissance of the High Middle Ages, the very mysteries, they created what they call the new mythology, which was a similar kind of thing. It's like going within and becoming, integrating all of these aspects of who we are. So then, of course, that went underground, and no one really knew that it was a renaissance of that until today.
I mean, it seems, thank you so much for that, Betty. It seems now, though, that, since 1900 or so, that science has gradually overturned those basic core assumptions of the Newtonian paradigm with the amazing discovery of quantum physics and everything that that involves, which is the
Yes.
renaissance that you speak of in a way that we're in now.
Yes, yes, thank God. There's a science that broke away from that and found itself. And if it's like, the old material paradigm is that we can have no effect whatsoever on nature. We just are here, and of course, just with quantum physics, just by observation, we change things. I mean, it was just a complete difference. So quantum physics certainly recognize different dimensions of reality. And there have been those quantum physicists who have experienced these other dimensions and are trying to bring it together. So yes, it's as though that's why it's a really great renaissance, because we have the science to back us up. Uh, that it's that the human being is an aggregate of a field, and when we think something, when we intend something, and it's very interesting, isn't it, that in the High Middle Ages it was ask the question, which is to put forth the intention to find that answer. If we have an intention today, that intention is reflected back to us from the field, and we're on our way. The field then works with us. So I'm so grateful for quantum physics, because it can help us get through this.
Yeah.
And I think this renaissance must work, because otherwise we might not be a human species if this renaissance falls as the other four did. Although the other four went underground and they're here today too.
I mean, it's such an amazing revelation, isn't it? Or rediscovery of the fact that, as you say, consciousness is the ground of all being. However far you go in, that's what you discover. Consciousness,
Yes,
not.
yes, as these quantum physicists say, who've had the experiences, who know, is that consciousness is primary. That is, consciousness exists before matter, and it's consciousness at the ground of being that creates matter. And when matter is no longer, because it's temporary, when it doesn't exist any longer, consciousness still exists. That's a great secret for us to know, to experience. That was a great secret of the mystery schools.
Yeah,
To know there is no death.
yeah. Betty, I wonder if you might pull things to a close now, but I wondered if I could ask you if you might share the story of one of your incredible visionary experiences that you had during one of your meditations, when a female presence came to you and sang to you. I've heard
Mm.
you talk about this experience a couple of times, and each time it's just taken my breath away.
It's I was still in my doubting phase when I had that. That happened before the deaths, and it was I was working with sacred medicine. I had been in South America, had worked with shamans, and I came back and I worked with sacred medicine. I was with two other women, and we wanted to have a ritual for our children and all children. And I can't tell it really. That's what everyone says who has such an experience. It's just so hard to tell as it happened, because it was so powerful. And I didn't I was still doubting. I was still trying to find her in that time. But it was that vision that I would say to myself, there's no way you could have done that or made that up. And that one was the core vision that I knew was real. And so what happened was that um, I, during meditation, I suddenly was aware that there was a great disk of light, and I knew it was pure consciousness. cosmic consciousness. But in that particular time, I wasn't giving it names, but I just knew that's what it was. It came in through the glass doors, into the room we were sitting, and it hovered over me. And it was so powerful that I knew that there's no way I could take in that consciousness. So out of the bottom of it swirled a feminine uh, being, and I could see just to her waist, she was dressed in white satin to the waist, and she had on a white satin square hat. So that was a mandala with the light circle of disc and the square white hat. And she came into my heart, and I actually could feel myself sit up. I could feel this energy just pull me up, and she began to sing through me. And she said, "You have called us, and we are here. Your planet has called us, and we are here. Can you feel us? Can you feel us? We are here." And then I suddenly knew so much. It was just as her consciousness was in me. And I knew that she was saying to me that, in fact, she did say, "We are the light. We are the light around your planet that encircled your planet." And I knew then that that light had been there for a long time, but it couldn't connect. We weren't ready to bring that light into the planet and anchor it. But she was making it clear that today we are ready to connect to your planet. And then the other two didn't quite know. Of course, they could hear her singing through me, but somehow they intuitively knew we were on the floor in a circle, and we sort of embraced each other. And we actually, it's like we could feel that energy coming through us and anchoring in the earth. It was the most powerful experience I've ever had in my life, because it was so loving. It was, "We are the light." She said, "We are the light." And it was total light, love, and consciousness. And that just flowed through us and into the planet. Afterward, I was so exhausted. I wasn't quite capable of carrying that kind of energy. And one woman, kind of a larger woman, she was just right to anchor me. And she somehow intuitively knew. She just held me, maybe for an hour. We just couldn't move. Just this energy was so great. And I know that when it says, like, it was like today we can anchor it, time doesn't mean anything in that dimension, really. And I read later that in Sri Aurobindo's ashram, that the mystics in 1950 had a similar experience. And they said, before we were bringing the energy up from the earth through us. And he said, now something's changed. That energy has come to the planet, and it's flooding the planet, and it's coming through us from the top down into the earth. And I thought, that was in the 50s. So I think it's been happening probably to people all over the planet. And I think that when we love, that's what we're doing. We become the anchors of that light when we love. So, sometimes we think, well, I'm not doing much and I wish I could do more. By loving, we are creating and anchoring that light. And that's what really was clear to me, that we are creative in our love, and that anchors us into the earth. Then later, my husband, before the death of our son, he'd been very tolerant of my interest, but he hadn't had that interest at all. And I was talking to him one time about something I'd had, and I realized he kept looking at the newspaper, and I realized he wasn't interested in what I had to say. And he said to me, but when I called him on it, he said, I just never had an experience like that, and I don't know how to relate to it. And that's fair, that's honest. But after our son died, things really changed for him. And he had a vision with our son, in which our son said to him, look up in the I Ching, this particular hexagram. And he said, starting from the top, which I thought was interesting, starting from the top, the hexagram usually start from the bottom up. He said, start from the top, straight, broken, broken, straight, straight, broken. And so when Ishvan had finished the vision, he said to me, do we have the I Ching? And I said, we had worked with it earlier, but it'd been a long time. So I ran into the study here to get it. And I went back, and so he said, well, look up that hexagram starting from the top with straight, broken, broken, straight, straight, broken. And I did, and it was 18 working on what has decayed. And he said, oh my God, that was the vision, is that Pishti, our son, said to his dad, Dad, read this hexagram carefully because it is your work, meaning his and mine, and it is the work of the earth. It is the work of the earth, this hexagram, because what has decayed? Of course, we haven't allowed the right brain and heart to be fully conscious in us. And we have to, and all the wasteland, it's the wasteland. So I think that it's a call for us to know the darkness and bring that light into it. But I said to him then, well, how did you remember that? And he said, oh, it's easy. He said, if you look at the lines, if a straight line is of the straight, broken, broken, straight, that's an M. And then you've got L and broken, that's L. I said, oh. And he said, it's merchants of light. And since English wasn't his first language, he sometimes would come up with funny things. I'd think, well, that's probably something he came up with, merchants of light. But later, I was reading and realized in Francis Yates, I had read it for my dissertation when I was in university, but I didn't remember anything about merchants of light, and he certainly hadn't read it. And then I discovered that, the merchants of light were a part of that whole movement, the Rosicrucian. And of course, Francis Bacon had written in the New Atlantis, he had called them, these merchants of light are those who, when their world was destroyed, they traveled throughout the world to bring the light to the cultures again, to recreate culture. And they were merchants of light. Well, I thought, well, Istvan wasn't coming up with something funny after all. And then I read in Graham Hancock that in many places where there was a Renaissance, these merchants of light or lords of light were called. And so then I came to realize, and he through other visions and me through other visions, is that these merchants of light, they've been working with the earth for a long time, and they are actually an energy field. It's on the planet now, that light that I experience. This is an energy field of light that's now on the earth, and it's a higher frequency. So it means that what we work with, we have a greater chance of succeeding because it's working with us. It's a higher frequency, and it allows people to be born who have already developed to a certain point, which can help us. And it helps us to, of course, be able to do our work, but it's a higher frequency of light on the earth. So when I get down, when I see what people are planning for the planet, I think of that, and I think I must honor and have faith in the light, which is love and consciousness. I think we have a real possibility to just so many people are experiencing things that I didn't hear anything about when I was in high school. I never heard such a thing,
Yes, thank you so much, Betty. And that's what your book has done. You've shown us all these merchants of light, these masters of light that knew how to initiate us into this wonderful cosmic heart-centered consciousness throughout our history as we look back. And it's such a wonderful service, and I'm greatly inspired, obviously, by your son.
Yeah.
So
Yes, he was. It was clear when he was in a car accident and killed, but he was in the hospital for 13 days before we took him off all the machines. But when we started having visions with him, it was clear that he wanted us to know he's fine, he's still alive. And then he wanted us to remember. It's like, wasn't telling us something, it's like, remember, because we have that in us, that remember why we were born, remember. And then he wanted us to know that the earth will be going through a tremendously creative period. And so that was helpful. But yes, and those visions with him, of course, helped the grief, because we saw, and I think that we all, we all have that heritage of being connected. We are meant to be connected with the other dimension, and that when those we love pass over, we have that within us to be connected. And I think we're restoring that again, because all of us, I mean, it's such grief if we love someone with everything we are, and then that person is gone, and we don't know whether, you know, that's it, as science, the old science told us. But I think we're learning that no, we have, it is the intention of our lives that we be in touch with that other dimension, that we know something about what they're doing, and that we know they're okay, and we're still working with them. And it seemed very clear that there's so many on the other side working with us on the earth now, because it's such a crucial transition or transformation. So yes, I was grateful to him after going through the teenage years when I didn't know whether I'd survive or not. But anyway, it was, yes, he always had. And it's an interesting thing, when he was a little kid, he drew so many pictures of the earth, and it's all black, and then there's the earth, and there's light around it, and there's a big beam of light coming to the earth. And I didn't, I saved them, but I didn't know quite what to make of them. But my husband Istvan, in one of his visions with our son Pishti, said, and I don't think Istvan even knew about those paintings. He said, our son said to Istvan, the earth will be, a beam of light is coming to the earth. Well, I thought about the light that I experienced, and this beam of the light was coming. And here he had painted those when he was little, of this beam of light to penetrate the earth and break open that darkness that was around it. So I thought that was rather phenomenal too, and I think life itself is more phenomenal than, we've been allowed to think. People dismiss it. That's just a coincidence. Or, oh, that's your imagining. Oh yeah, sure. I mean, working at a college where, people were, it was, so much was dismissed. And therefore it's hard to really allow it to unfold and blossom in us in such a culture. But it's happening now.
Yeah, it's happening now. And thank you so much for your contribution to that great happening,
Yeah,
Betty. I wonder if now we might invite our guests to ask a few questions. If I just return to um, the gallery view. Here we are. Maybe some of you have questions for Betty for this last 20 minutes.
I have a question actually, relevant to what you finished with, Betty. About writing your book and being, so transparent about all you believe and all that you've experienced, and how has that impacted on your life generally? I mean, because people are there's still so many people that aren't believing in the irrational, and and I just wondered how it is to live your truth.
I'm not exactly clear of your.
Yeah, I mean.
Oh, there you are. I didn't find you. Yeah.
Ah.
Sorry. So, just your question once again. I'm so sorry.
It's actually a bit of how you finished, is that you, by writing your book, by revealing your visions, and you're living your truth. And I wondered how that, because my experience of the sort of beliefs that we all share aren't welcome in a lot of people. It's quite hard to reveal the irrational kind of.
Yes. Well, there were different when I wrote the first book when I was still teaching in college, and people were so sympathetic and so loving and kind and really wonderful friends, but we didn't talk much about it. It just couldn't be spoken about, it seemed. And I was retired when I was writing the book, and all the time I'm meeting with my colleagues from the college. They know I'm writing a book, but we never talk about what it is. They knew it was something, I think, that they didn't want to talk about.
Yeah.
So that was kind of, but I loved them and they were great. And, but I couldn't share my life with them. And even now that it's out and, uh, they don't know what to do with it, but they're loving
No.
and kind. And I know one of them said, I'm getting old, Beth. I think we need to have a conversation. But that's as far as it ever went. But actually, in writing it, it helped to bring it together for me, and also it brought me together with people like you,
Mm.
and so many people who are having experiences and who are questioning uh, and doing things. For instance, that just recently, a man got in touch with me who is writing a book on merchants, and he didn't know anything about my book. And he saw in the Facebook someone mentioned Merchants of Light, a book, and he thought, my goodness, because he had a vision of uh, the true archetype of the merchant. And he talks about it as in terms of Carl Jung, about what an archetype is. And he saw that the true archetype for merchants was developing soul, bringing soul into all of our businesses. And so he got in touch with me, and then we discovered we're in the same town. He's in Claremont. And so, and he has already started a company, and he's got a model of how to do it, what goes to the world, and how all of the different aspects of bringing soul into business. I think he's about 48, and he's totally, but he said, I mean, this whole idea of the merchant. So I just thought that was really interesting. And there've been
Mm.
things like that, that people, I think the great part of it is that uh, people are doing such incredible things. And uh, there's been a film made of Merchants of Light by Anthony Chen, the filmmaker in France, and it's
Mm.
just called Merchants of Light, and one can just go to YouTube and get it. And I've spent about a month and a half just answering emails from people, because one of the things they say, it's like connecting the dots, and this is a thread that I follow all my life, and but also they reveal the things that they're doing. So it's 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 been an adventure for sure, quite a journey, and basically a journey to discover this incredible creativity and beauty in so many people, and just
Yeah.
to see the power. I've so many mothers and fathers too who've lost children or whose children have passed over. Uh, they've what has happened in their lives as a result of
Mm.
that. How that
Yeah.
love, when you think of the human ability to love is so great, and you really see it in grief. It's just like you see it in so many ways, but in grief it's just like so powerful. If we've got
Yeah.
that power, I think we can do anything. And I think
Mm.
uh, that has been a real beautiful experience to see with the mothers and fathers. Kim and I have a group through let's see, family. What is it? Forever. How come I can remember that? Forever Family Foundation. And we meet once a month with people who've lost, whose children have passed on. Just last
Mm.
time it was an 8-month-old baby that just passed. And these parents, it's like, but partners and all, just people who people love. But the power in these people, they are determined to know what's going on in the world. When that love has passed to the other side, it really ignites the journey. And these people entering the labyrinth, and they are going to find out, if they hadn't known anything before. So that's been a very powerful experience of what's going on with other people in the world.
Oh yeah, and I'm so grateful for today because I lost my son, and so it just hearing you speak just then is lots of things are going on. So, but I'm
Yeah.
really grateful for you.
Well, I grew up with my mother, Irish in the South and poor, and she had lost her mother when she was very young, and what she went through, and then her mother had lost her mother, and here was a series of mothers dying young, and I was so convinced that that would happen to me. And my mother had had a dream 2 years before her mother died. And when her mother died, everything happened as it happened in the dream. And I just became horrified that that would happen to me. And I had a dream that she died. So for 2 years in my life, I thought of everything, what it would be like when she would not be there anymore. It was just horrible. And then one day, this is something about the field. I went to school one morning and some girls were jumping rope and they said, "Oh, Betty, I dreamed last night your mother died." I mean, I was just stricken because the 2 years were almost up. And I went all the way back home. It's about a couple of miles just to see that my mother was okay. So the death was for me just like the end of everything. And I couldn't even bear to hear the word death or dream stated. And when we went, of course, I was older by the time our son died, but I thought when I was writing the book, if that book could help anybody lessen that pain, then it would be worth it,
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Viv. You can't see me. There's some inexplicable reason my camera packed up. I've been sitting at the machine for about half an hour. It was fine, and it suddenly went. I don't know how to fix it. I'm sorry. I don't know what to ask, Betty. I just wanted to say thank you so much. I've listened intently to every word. I've read a little bit of your book on my Kindle today, and I shall certainly be getting it, and the others too. I just think it's wonderful. I just want to say I think it's so generous of you to share with us, your innermost feelings, and I just think it's profoundly generous and profoundly altruistic. It will help. It is helping other people, and I guess I'm really impressed by how you spoke about you gave us an awful lot of information, which is why I'm not really asking a question, because you told us so very much. I feel I've learned so much already about the changing cultures over time. But it just seems to me that often we seem to swap one kind of oppression for another. The belief system that's predominant, or how the church, the power of it, and that anyone who questioned even the slightest bit of dogma, was a heretic. And the ideologies change, but this impression always seems to be there. And I just hope that one day, and do you think it's coming, the day when we are more enlightened, literally enlightened, and books like yours, well, they do seem popular. A lot of people, actually. I think a lot of people are open to this, do you think, now?
Yeah, I do. I always compare it with when I was in high school. I just, it was, or even in college, I didn't hear this kind of discussion about inner experiences and experiencing. And I think, instead of going from one religion to the other, what this is saying is that they're all paths. And we have to go within, as Jesus said, I think so beautifully, find that which is within you, bring it forth. And that is the divine universe. So yes, I really do think that this fifth Renaissance, this period today, there are so many things. We have quantum physics. We now know about heart consciousness with heart math. That it is actually the fifth brain component, and that it gives more information to the brain than the brain gives to the heart, and that it opens us to the cosmos. We now know about these cultures that I've talked about, that they were shaman mystic cultures and how they were suppressed, but they lived underground and they're back today, that there's been a continuous golden thread of our search for who we are. And indigenous cultures are now saying, this is the time we must bring forth all that we know. And people are experiencing incredible anomalous experiences with UFO, with crop circles, with when people die, people are whom we love, we're experiencing things. And I'm impressed with what is going on the planet. And it's terrible, because when we look at the power of the church, we see that the power that so-called science is trying to give to itself. Of course, it's censoring disagreeing voices of scientists, which the church did. I mean, during the pandemic was a horrible time of censorship of anyone who disagreed with those controlling and in power. This is very dangerous. And I think that that's the power now. And what is it wanting? It's telling us also the same thing the Deuteronomist said, that you're worthless. There's no meaning, there's no this, there's no that. We're God, we'll do this. And I think that we have experience enough to know that if someone is playing that role, we need to look into it pretty carefully, because our destiny depends on our consciousness. And so it's like having this knowledge is very important for us right now, because as we speak, there are agencies trying to make treaties in which we will have no vote, no power. And it's not in the news, of course. So I think that becoming aware of the Deuteronomist of today, but is very important. And we have a history that will help us, because we're connecting the links of this golden chain now. You know, we're connecting the past that was robbed from us, that we were lied to about. This is who we are. And we are powerful. We can stand up against this darkness. The more light we bring to it, the weaker it is. And we want to balance that. And I think we have the power to do it, and the intention.
Thank you, Betty. I mean, it's we're coming to the close now. It's just been so inspiring and so empowering, as you say. It's just been a wonderful afternoon, and I speak on behalf of everybody here. I'm absolutely certain that we are most grateful for you coming and sharing your time with us this afternoon.
Well, that means, I want to say that you're such a good group. I mean, I feel your energy feels good, and I'm just pleased to be able to get acquainted a little bit, and to know you exist and know the work you're doing. When I was in the Jung Society out here in Claremont, we worked with the transpersonal group, and they were wonderful, beautiful work. So I'm just grateful and honored that you asked me to come. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Betty. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, everybody else for also attending today. And, we'll love you and leave you, and hopefully we'll see you again next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.